The lace of her wedding gown caught on the church pew as Eleanor Morrison stood frozen at the altar, staring at the empty doorway where Thomas Whitfield should have appeared 15 minutes ago in the dusty town of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, on a sweltering June morning in 1882. The preacher cleared his throat for the third time. The small congregation shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and Eleanor felt her chest tighten with the horrible realization that was slowly settling over the room like a suffocating blanket. He was not coming. Thomas Whitfield, the banker's son who had courted her for 8 months with pretty words and promises of a comfortable life, had left her standing at the altar in front of everyone she knew. Her mother gasped from the front row, and Eleanor heard the whispers beginning to ripple through the church like wildfire. Her father stood up, his face red with fury and humiliation, and stormed toward the door. Eleanor wanted to disappear, to sink through the floorboards and never emerge again. The white dress that had taken her mother 3 months to sew suddenly felt like a costume, a mockery of the joy she should have been feeling. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Thomas Whitfield the satisfaction of knowing he had broken her completely. "Eleanor, sweetheart." Her mother appeared at her side, her voice thick with sympathy and anger. "Let me help you out of here." But before Eleanor could move, the church door swung open with such force it banged against the wall. Everyone turned to look, perhaps hoping Thomas had finally arrived with some reasonable explanation. Instead, a tall figure stood silhouetted against the bright sunlight, dust settling around his boots. As he stepped inside, Eleanor recognized him as Jake Sullivan, one of the ranch hands from the Circle M ranch just outside of town. She had seen him around Silver Creek, always keeping to himself, a man of few words but known for his honest work and steady character. Jake removed his hat, revealing dark hair slightly dampened with sweat from the morning heat. His jaw was set firm, and his blue eyes surveyed the scene with quick understanding. He was perhaps 26 or 27, lean and weathered from years of outdoor work, with the kind of quiet strength that came from a life lived honestly. Eleanor stood there in her wedding dress, 22 years old and utterly humiliated, wondering what could possibly happen next to make this day any worse. Jake walked down the aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The congregation watched in stunned silence as he approached the altar. He stopped directly in front of Eleanor, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch despite her misery. "Miss Eleanor," he said, his voice low and steady. "I heard what happened. Thomas Whitfield rode out of town at dawn with a woman from the saloon and a bag full of money he stole from his father's bank. He's a coward and a fool." The gasps from the congregation were louder now, mixed with angry murmurs. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Not only had Thomas abandoned her, but he had done so in the most shameful way possible, proving he had never been the man she thought he was. Jake took a step closer, his expression earnest. "His loss is my gain. Will you have me?" Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me instead," Jake said, his voice firmer now, carrying through the church. "I know this is sudden, and I know you barely know me. But I've admired you from afar for months, Miss Eleanor. I never spoke up because you were spoken for, and I respected that. But Thomas Whitfield never deserved you. I can offer you an honest life, hard work, and a man who will never leave you standing alone. I have a piece of land I've been building on, a small ranch that is starting to prosper. It is not much yet, but it is mine, earned with my own hands. I would be honored if you would share it with me." The church erupted in shocked whispers. Eleanor's mother clutched her husband's arm. The preacher looked completely bewildered. Eleanor felt dizzy, her mind spinning with the impossibility of what was happening. This morning she had expected to marry Thomas and move into a comfortable house in town. Now Thomas was gone. A thief and a traitor, and a cowboy she had never spoken more than a few words to was proposing marriage at her abandoned wedding. She should say no. It was insane. She should run from this church and hide in her room for a month. But as she looked into Jake Sullivan's honest blue eyes, she saw something she had never quite seen in Thomas's gaze: genuine respect and sincerity. Jake was not offering her pretty lies or empty promises. He was offering her a choice, a way forward when her entire future had just collapsed. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this?" Jake's expression softened. "Because you deserve better than to be remembered as the woman abandoned at the altar. Because I've watched you help your neighbors, care for the children at the schoolhouse, and bring food to the sick without expecting anything in return. Because you are kind and strong, and because I believe we could build something good together if you are willing to take a chance on a simple cowboy who only has his word to give." Eleanor felt tears finally escape, sliding down her cheeks. But these tears were different from the ones of humiliation. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a glimmer of hope in the disaster of this day. She glanced back at her mother, who looked stunned but gave her a small, encouraging nod. Her father stood with his arms crossed, studying Jake with a critical eye. "Do you mean it?" Eleanor asked, her voice stronger now. "This is not some act of pity?" "No pity," Jake said firmly. "This is me taking the chance I should have taken months ago. I will understand if you say no. But if you say yes, I promise you this: I will work every day to make you happy. I will never lie to you, never abandon you, and never give you reason to regret taking a chance on me." The entire church waited in breathless silence. Eleanor looked down at her white dress, at the bouquet of wildflowers her sister had picked that morning, at the altar where she had expected to pledge her life to a man who had proven himself unworthy. Then she looked back at Jake Sullivan, at his calloused hands and sun-weathered face, at the honest hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, I will marry you." The congregation erupted in a mixture of shocked exclamations and surprised approval. Jake's face broke into a slow smile that transformed his serious features into something warm and genuinely joyful. The preacher, after a moment of stunned hesitation, cleared his throat and looked between them. "Well then," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice, "I suppose we have a wedding to perform. Jake Sullivan, step up here beside the bride." What followed was perhaps the strangest wedding Silver Creek had ever witnessed. Jake stood beside Eleanor in his work clothes, dust still on his boots, while she wore the dress meant for another man. But as they spoke their vows, Eleanor felt a strange sense of rightness settling over her. Jake's hand was warm and steady as he took hers, and when he slipped a simple silver ring on her finger, a ring he pulled from his pocket that had belonged to his mother, she felt tears threatening again. "I was carrying this for luck," he admitted quietly. "I never imagined I would use it today." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake leaned in and kissed her gently, respectfully, a kiss that held promise but not presumption. The congregation applauded, and Eleanor heard her mother crying happy tears. Her father approached them as they walked back down the aisle together. "Jake Sullivan," her father said sternly, "you have taken on my daughter in unusual circumstances. I expect you to keep every promise you made today." "Yes, sir," Jake replied, meeting his new father-in-law's eyes directly. "You have my word." Her father studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "See that you do, and you are welcome at our table any time." The reception that had been planned for Thomas and Eleanor became a celebration of a different wedding entirely. The food her mother and aunts had prepared was served, and the small band struck up music in the church hall. Eleanor stood beside Jake, accepting congratulations from neighbors who seemed equally shocked and charmed by the turn of events. Some of the older women clucked their tongues at the impropriety, but even they seemed to soften when they saw how attentively Jake stayed by Eleanor's side. "I should probably tell you more about myself," Jake said during a quiet moment, leading her outside for fresh air. The June sun was high now, beating down on the dusty street. "I have been working ranches since I was 15. My parents had a small farm in Texas, but they died of fever when I was 17. I have been on my own since then, working my way west. 3 years ago, I bought land about 5 miles outside Silver Creek. It is rough country, but there is good water and grass. I have been building a house and growing my herd slowly. Eleanor listened, trying to absorb this information about the man she had just married. Do you have any other family? A sister in Santa Fe, Jake replied. She married a merchant there. We write occasionally. And I have a good dog named Rust, who is probably wondering where I am right now. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself smiling. You left your dog alone to come propose to me? He is used to me being gone during the day, Jake said. Then his expression grew more serious. Eleanor, I want you to know that I understand this is all very sudden and strange. I do not expect anything from you tonight or any night until you are ready. The house has 2 rooms. You can have your privacy for as long as you need it. His consideration touched her deeply. Thank you, she said softly. I appreciate that kindness. They returned to the reception, where Eleanor danced with her father and Jake spoke with some of the ranchers he knew. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at her unexpected husband. He was handsome in a rugged way, she realized, with strong features and a quiet confidence that was appealing. More than that, everything about his behavior today spoke of integrity and courage. It took a brave man to walk into a church and propose to a woman at her abandoned wedding. As evening approached, Jake brought his wagon around. It was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 strong horses. Eleanor had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple traveling outfit, and her mother had packed a bag with her belongings, tears streaming down her face as she held Eleanor tight. Are you sure about this? Her mother whispered. It all happened so fast. I'm sure, Eleanor said, surprised to find she meant it. Jake Sullivan is a good man, Mama. I can feel it. Then God bless you both, her mother said, kissing her forehead. The ride to Jake's ranch was quiet, the wagon rolling along the dusty road as the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor sat beside Jake, very aware of his presence, of the strength in his hands as he guided the horses. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way. All red rocks and scattered juniper trees, mountains rising in the distance. It is pretty country, Eleanor said, breaking the silence. It is, Jake agreed. Hard but honest. That is what I love about it. The land does not lie. You work it right and it provides. You neglect it and it shows. They arrived at the ranch as twilight was falling. Eleanor saw a modest house built of wood and stone, clearly constructed with care. There was a barn, a corral with several horses and cattle grazing in the distance. The dog Jake had mentioned, a reddish-brown shepherd mix, came bounding up, barking excitedly. This is Rust, Jake said, climbing down and helping Eleanor from the wagon. Rust, this is Eleanor. She is the lady of the house now. So you be on your best behavior. Rust sniffed Eleanor's hand, then wagged his tail in approval. Eleanor laughed, scratching behind his ears. Hello, Rust. I am pleased to meet you. Jake showed her inside the house. It was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a smaller room that was currently being used for storage. There were no curtains on the windows yet, and the furniture was rough-hewn but sturdy. I know it is not fancy, Jake said, suddenly sounding uncertain. I have been focused on the land and the stock more than the house. It is honest, Eleanor said, echoing his earlier words. And it is ours. I can make it a home. Something in Jake's expression eased. He started a fire in the stove and heated some beans and cornbread he had prepared earlier. They ate dinner together at the simple wooden table, and Eleanor found the silence companionable rather than awkward. Jake asked about her family, her interests, and what she had hoped to do with her life. She told him about her love of reading, her work at the schoolhouse, her dreams of one day having children to raise. I want children too, Jake said quietly. A family. People to pass this land on to teach everything I have learned, but only when you are ready, Eleanor. I meant what I said about taking time. That night, Jake showed her to the bedroom and insisted she take it. He carried his blanket roll out to the main room, settling by the fireplace. Eleanor lay in the simple bed staring at the ceiling, her mind reeling from the extraordinary day. This morning she had awakened expecting to marry Thomas Whitfield. Tonight she was Eleanor Sullivan, wife of a cowboy she barely knew on a ranch miles from town. But strangely, she did not feel afraid. She felt something she had not expected: relief. Thomas had always been somewhat condescending, treating her opinions as charming but ultimately unimportant. Jake spoke to her like an equal, valued her thoughts, and showed her a respect that Thomas never had. Perhaps this strange twist of fate was not a disaster after all. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Over the following days, Eleanor began to settle into life at the ranch. Jake woke before dawn each day to tend the cattle and horses, but he always made sure there was water drawn and kindling split before she rose. Eleanor worked on the house, sewing curtains from fabric Jake brought from town, organizing the kitchen, and starting a small garden near the house. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the day and talking quietly in the evenings. Jake was a patient teacher, showing her how to care for the chickens he kept, how to spot when a horse was favoring a leg, and how to read the weather in the clouds. Eleanor taught him about herbs and cooking, improving their simple meals with seasonings and techniques her mother had taught her. Slowly, carefully, they were building something together. 3 weeks after their wedding, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching. Her heart jumped with sudden fear, memories of stories about outlaws and raiders flooding her mind. But Jake appeared from the barn, his rifle held casually but ready. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The riders turned out to be neighbors from a ranch to the east, the Patterson family. They had heard about the unusual wedding and wanted to meet Jake's new wife. Mary Patterson, a warm woman in her 40s, embraced Eleanor like an old friend. "We are so glad to have another woman nearby," Mary said. "It can get lonely out here. You must come to dinner next week." The visit was the first of many. Eleanor discovered a small community of ranch families who looked out for each other, helped during hard times, and celebrated together during good ones. She and Jake attended barn dances and church services in town, and Eleanor slowly realized that her life here, though different from what she had planned, was rich and fulfilling. One evening in late July, Eleanor and Jake were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Rust lay at their feet, and the air was finally cooling after another hot day. Eleanor had been thinking about something for days, gathering her courage. "Jake," she said quietly, "I want to thank you." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes questioning. "For what?" "For giving me a choice that day," Eleanor said. "For offering me a way forward when I felt like my life was ending. For being patient and kind these past weeks. For being exactly who you said you would be." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, I should thank you for taking a chance on me. I know this was not how you expected your life to go." "No," she agreed, "but I think it might be better than what I had planned." She took a deep breath. "Jake, I would like to be your wife in truth, not just in name, if you still want that." The look of hope and joy that crossed Jake's face made Eleanor's heart skip. "Are you certain?" he asked softly. "I am certain," she said. "You have shown me what a true partner looks like. You have never demanded or presumed. You have earned my trust and my respect, and somewhere along the way, you have also earned my affection." Jake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. "Eleanor Sullivan, you are the finest thing that ever happened to me. I will spend my life trying to deserve you." He leaned in and kissed her, and this kiss was different from the chaste one at their wedding. This kiss held warmth and promise, and the beginning of something deeper. That night, Eleanor did not sleep alone, and she discovered that the physical union with Jake was as honest and considerate as everything else about him. He was gentle and attentive, making sure of her comfort and pleasure, and Eleanor felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. In the months that followed, Eleanor and Jake's relationship deepened in every way. They laughed together, worked together, and loved together. Jake consulted her on every decision about the ranch, valuing her opinions on everything from which cattle to sell to where to plant the new windbreak of trees. Eleanor threw herself into building their home, making it warm and welcoming, a place where neighbors gathered and friendships flourished. By autumn, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening as they were preparing dinner, and his whoop of joy brought Rust running to see what the excitement was about. Jake lifted her carefully, spinning her once before setting her down and looking concerned. "Should you be lifted? Is that safe? What do you need?" he asked, his words tumbling over each other. Eleanor laughed, touched by his obvious delight and worry. "I am pregnant, not fragile. But yes, we should be a little more careful." Jake became even more attentive if that was possible. He insisted on doing the heavier chores, brought her special treats from town, and read to her in the evenings from the books she loved. Eleanor blossomed with the pregnancy and with the security of Jake's love. The fear and humiliation of that day at the altar seemed like something from another lifetime. In February of 1883, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made the Arizona nights bitter, Eleanor went into labor. Mary Patterson came to help, along with the doctor from Silver Creek. Jake paced outside wearing a path in the dirt until he heard the sharp cry of a newborn. Mary emerged, beaming. "You have a son, Jake, and Eleanor is doing fine." Jake rushed inside to find Eleanor exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and seemed to be trying to focus on his mother's face. "Meet Samuel," Eleanor said softly. "Samuel James Sullivan, if you approve." Jake knelt beside the bed, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Samuel James is perfect." He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, marveling at the miniature perfection. "Hello, Samuel. I am your father, and I promise to do my best by you." The first year of Samuel's life was busy and exhausting and wonderful. Jake proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby at night when he fussed, talking to him constantly about the ranch and the animals and everything he would teach him someday. Eleanor watched her husband and son together and felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, Eleanor and Jake continued to build their ranch. They added more cattle, improved the house with a proper second bedroom and a larger kitchen, and established themselves as respected members of the ranching community. Jake's reputation for honesty and hard work brought him opportunities to buy more land and expand their operation. One afternoon in the summer of 1884, Eleanor was working in her garden while Samuel played nearby with Rust when a familiar figure rode up the lane. Her father dismounted and swept Samuel up into his arms, making the little boy giggle. "He looks like you, Jake," her father said when Jake emerged from the barn, "but he has Eleanor's smile." "We are blessed," Jake agreed, shaking his father-in-law's hand. Over dinner, Eleanor's father shared news from town. Thomas Whitfield had been caught in New Mexico and was serving time in territorial prison for theft. His companion had left him as soon as the money ran out. The story had become a cautionary tale about greed and poor character. "I am grateful to him, in a strange way," Eleanor said that evening after her father had left. "If he had not abandoned me, I would never have found you." Jake pulled her close. "His loss was my gain, that is true. But Eleanor, you need to know something. What I feel for you now is so much deeper than what I felt that day in the church. I admired you then. I wanted to help you. But now I know you. All of you. Your strength and kindness, and the way you hum while you work, and how you make everything better just by being present. I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered, "more than I ever thought possible. You have given me a life I never dreamed of, Jake Sullivan. You have given me a home and a family and a partnership that makes me stronger. Every day I wake up grateful that you had the courage to walk into that church." They stood together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky while Samuel slept inside and Russ dozed at their feet. The ranch spread out before them, the land they were building together, and the future stretched ahead full of promise. 2 years later, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Elizabeth. She had Jake's blue eyes and Eleanor's delicate features, and Samuel was instantly protective of his baby sister. The house rang with laughter and the noise of children, and Jake added another room to accommodate their growing family. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources, harsh winters that took a toll on the cattle, and the constant hard work that came with ranching life. But Eleanor and Jake faced every challenge together, drawing strength from each other and the life they had built. In the spring of 1887, Silver Creek organized a town celebration for its 20th anniversary. The entire community gathered for competitions, dancing, and festivities. Eleanor wore a new dress Jake had bought her, deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Jake wore his best clothes. Samuel, now 4, raced around with the other children while Jake carried 2-year-old Rose on his shoulders. During the dancing, Eleanor's mother pulled her aside. "You look happy, truly happy," she said, her eyes tender. "That terrible day at your first wedding, I was so worried about what would become of you, but Jake Sullivan has proven to be the best thing that could have happened." "He is my blessing," Eleanor agreed, watching her husband laugh at something one of the other ranchers said while Rose tugged on his hair. "That awful moment when I realized Thomas was not coming felt like the end of the world, but it was actually the beginning of my real life." As the evening wore on and the dancing continued, Jake found Eleanor and drew her into a waltz. They moved together easily, years of partnership evident in how naturally they fit. "What are you thinking about, Skimmer?" Jake asked, noticing the soft smile on her face. "I'm thinking about that day 5 years ago," Eleanor said. "About how you walked into that church and changed my entire life with a few words. About how the worst day of my life became the best day because it led me to you." "His loss was my gain," Jake said, echoing the words he had spoken that day. "But Eleanor, I gained more than I ever imagined. I gained a partner, a best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Every day with you is a gift." "And every day with you is an adventure," Eleanor replied. "Even the ordinary days feel special because we are together." They danced until Samuel tugged on Jake's pants, asking for a turn, and Jake lifted his son up to dance with him while Eleanor took Rose. The family swayed together to the music, and Eleanor looked around at the community that had welcomed her, at the town where her story had taken such an unexpected turn, and at the man who had given her everything by simply offering his heart. The years continued to pass with the rhythm of ranch life. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning to rope and ride from his father. Rose proved to have a gift with animals, able to gentle even the wildest colt with patience and kindness. In 1889, Eleanor gave birth to twins, boys they named Daniel and Thomas, and the house bulged with the noise and chaos and joy of 4 children. Jake expanded the ranch steadily, always with Eleanor's input and support. They became one of the most successful operations in the area, known for their quality cattle and their fair dealing. Jake never forgot where he came from, often hiring young men down on their luck and giving them the same kind of chance he had once needed. One evening in the autumn of 1891, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Jake sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The porch was bigger now, with proper furniture instead of rough benches, but the view was the same, their land stretching out under the Arizona sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked suddenly, taking a chance on a cowboy you barely knew. Eleanor turned to look at him, taking in the face she knew as well as her own now. There were a few more lines around his eyes, testament to years of sun and hard work, but he was still the same man who had walked into that church 9 years ago and offered her hope. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You are everything you promised to be that day and so much more. You have given me a life full of love and purpose and joy. Our children will grow up knowing what it means to be loved unconditionally, to work hard, to treat others with respect." That is because of the man you are." "We built it together," Jake said, taking her hand. "Everything we have, everything we are, we created it side by side. You are the strongest, wisest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, Eleanor Sullivan. I thank God every day that I had the courage to speak up that day." "And I thank God every day that you did," Eleanor said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "We took a leap of faith together, and we built a life better than anything I could have imagined." Inside, Rust barked once, probably hearing one of the children stirring. Jake squeezed Eleanor's hand before standing to check on their family. Eleanor followed him, pausing at the threshold to look back at the land they had built together, at the life that had emerged from the ashes of humiliation and abandonment. Thomas Whitfield's cowardice had given her the greatest gift, though he never intended it. His betrayal had opened a door she never knew existed, leading her to a man who valued her, respected her, and loved her with a constancy that never wavered. Jake Sullivan had walked into that church and offered her his heart with a simple declaration, "His loss is my gain. Will you have me?" And in saying yes, Eleanor had found not just a husband but a true partner, a best friend, and a love that would last a lifetime. As she stepped inside their home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, the sleeping children and the man who had proven day after day that true love was built on trust, respect, and unwavering commitment, Eleanor Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The worst moment of her life had led her to the best life she could have imagined, and she would be grateful for that twist of fate every single day. The story of the abandoned bride and the cowboy who proposed at her failed wedding became part of Silver Creek's folklore, told and retold with growing embellishment over the years. But for Eleanor and Jake, it was simply the beginning of their story, the moment when two people took a chance on each other and built something lasting and true. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Jake would always smile and say, "I saw your grandmother standing in a church in the most beautiful dress, and I knew I had to at least try." And Eleanor would add, "And he gave me a choice when I thought I had none, and that made all the difference." Their love story was not one of love at first sight or dramatic passion. It was the story of two people who chose each other, who worked every day to build something good and lasting, who faced hardships together and celebrated victories as a team. It was the story of trust earned and given, of respect that deepened into love, of partnership that created a legacy. As the 1890s progressed, the Sullivan Ranch thrived. Samuel, at 12, was already a skilled horseman and a hard worker. Rose, at 10, had a dozen ribbons from the county fair for her way with animals. The twins, Daniel and Thomas, were 7 and full of mischief and energy. The ranch house had been expanded twice more, and there was talk of building a proper barn for horses separate from the cattle barn. Eleanor had become a pillar of the community, organizing charitable efforts and teaching Sunday school. Jake served on the territorial council, advocating for fair treatment of small ranchers and working to improve schools in rural areas. Together, they had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of integrity and service. On their 10th wedding anniversary in June of 1892, Jake surprised Eleanor with a trip to Tucson. They left the children with Eleanor's parents and took the train south, staying in a proper hotel and dining in restaurants. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since Samuel was born. "This is lovely," Eleanor said, as they strolled through the town plaza one evening, "but I find myself missing the children and the ranch." Jake laughed. "I was just thinking the same thing. We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Eleanor confirmed. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Jake Sullivan, 10 years ago, you saved me from the worst humiliation of my life. But more than that, you gave me the chance to become the person I was meant to be. With you, I am stronger, braver, happier than I ever thought possible. Thank you for choosing me that day." "Eleanor, you are the one who took the risk," Jake said seriously. "You said yes to a cowboy you barely knew, trusted me with your life and your future. You have worked beside me, supported me, challenged me to be better. You have given me children and a home and a love that makes every day worthwhile. I am the one who should be thanking you." They kissed there in the plaza, not caring who saw. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way and built something beautiful together. When they returned to the ranch, the children mobbed them with hugs and stories of everything that had happened in their absence. Rust barked excitedly, and the house felt complete again with everyone home. That night, after the children were settled and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Jake sat together going over the ranch accounts and planning for the next season, working together as they always did. "I have been thinking," Jake said as they worked, "in a few years Samuel will be old enough to take on more responsibility. Maybe we could travel more, see some of the country. Would you like that?" "I would like anything, as long as we are together," Eleanor said simply. "But yes, I would enjoy seeing more of the world with you." The years continued to unfold with their mixture of ordinary days and special moments. There were birthdays and holidays, harvest celebrations, and quiet winter evenings by the fire. There were losses, too, as Rust finally grew old and passed peacefully in his sleep, and Eleanor's father died after a short illness. But through it all, Eleanor and Jake remained steadfast partners, their love deepening with every shared experience. Samuel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's integrity and his mother's kindness. At 19, he married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, and they built a house on Sullivan land to start their own branch of the ranch. Rose, at 17, had her pick of suitors, but took her time choosing, wanting a partnership like her parents had shown her. The twins, at 14, were already as tall as their father and learning every aspect of ranching. One spring evening in 1897, 15 years after that fateful wedding day, Eleanor stood in her kitchen preparing dinner. The house smelled of baking bread and roasting chicken, and through the window she could see Jake and the twins working with the horses in the corral. Rose was at the table doing schoolwork, and from the neighboring house she could hear Samuel's wife singing to their first grandchild. Eleanor paused in her work, overwhelmed for a moment by gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full, rich life, had started with heartbreak and humiliation, but Jake Sullivan had walked into that church and offered her something precious, a second chance, a new beginning, and a love built on the solid foundation of respect and partnership. That evening, after dinner and chores were done, Eleanor and Jake walked out to the porch as they so often did. The habit of years had made it their special time, the moment when they could talk about the day, make plans, or simply sit in comfortable silence. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night here?" Eleanor asked. "You said the land does not lie, that you work it right and it provides." "I remember," Jake said. "That is true of love too," Eleanor continued. "We worked at this at us every single day. We were honest with each other, respectful, patient, and look what we have built. Not just the ranch, but this family, this life." Jake pulled her close. "Eleanor Sullivan, you are the best decision I ever made. Walking into that church 15 years ago was the bravest and smartest thing I ever did. And saying yes to you was the same for me," Eleanor replied. "I was so scared that day, so humiliated and hurt, and you gave me hope. You gave me a future. You gave me love." They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they had worked, raising children who would carry on their legacy of hard work and integrity. The cowboy and the abandoned bride had become partners in the truest sense, building a life that honored them both. As the Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Eleanor thought about that young woman who had stood at the altar in her white dress, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened girl that everything would be more than all right, that the cowboy walking down the aisle would prove to be her salvation and her joy, that the life ahead would be richer and fuller than anything she had planned, but perhaps she did not need to. That girl had found the courage to say yes to an uncertain future, to trust a stranger with her life, and to work every day to build something lasting. And in doing so, she had found not just a husband, but a true partner, a love story for the ages, and a life lived fully and well. The Sullivan Ranch continued to prosper through the turn of the century. As Arizona moved towards statehood, the Sullivan family became an integral part of its history. Samuel took over more of the daily operations, working alongside his father and proving himself a capable rancher. Rose married a veterinarian who settled in Silver Creek, and together they improved the health and breeding of livestock throughout the region. The twins, Daniel and Thomas, both remained on the ranch, each managing different aspects of the growing operation. Eleanor and Jake watched their children flourish with pride and satisfaction. They became grandparents several times over, and their home remained the heart of the family, where everyone gathered for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The story of how they met was told to each new grandchild, a tale of taking chances and choosing love even in difficult circumstances. In 1905, on their 23rd anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors from throughout the territory came to honor the couple who had become an example of what a true partnership looked like. There were speeches and music, dancing and feasting, and Eleanor and Jake found themselves repeatedly thanked for their generosity, their leadership, and their example. "We are just ordinary people," Jake protested when yet another speaker praised them. But Samuel stood up to respond. "No, Pa. You and Ma showed all of us what it means to build a life on honesty and hard work and love. You took a chance on each other when it would have been easier to walk away. You worked together through every challenge, and you created something that will last for generations. That is not ordinary. That is extraordinary." Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks as she looked at her family, at the community they had helped build, at the man beside her who had been her rock and her joy for over 2 decades. Jake squeezed her hand, and she knew he felt the same overwhelming gratitude. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and Jake gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on what they had built. They had more time for each other, for quiet mornings over coffee and long rides through the land they loved. Jake's hair turned silver, and Eleanor's face showed the lines of a life well lived, but they moved through their days together with the ease of 2 people who knew each other completely. One summer evening in 1910, 28 years after that fateful wedding day, Eleanor and Jake sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. They were in their 50s now, their children grown and successful, their grandchildren numerous and thriving. The ranch that Jake had started alone was now a family enterprise spanning hundreds of acres. "We did all right, did we not?" Jake said quietly. Eleanor smiled, taking his hand. "We did better than all right. We did magnificently." "I still think about that day sometimes," Jake admitted. "Standing in the back of that church, watching you at the altar, I almost did not do it. I thought you would refuse, that everyone would think I was crazy." "What made you go through with it?" Eleanor asked, though she had heard the story many times. "I looked at you," Jake said simply, "and I thought about how it would feel to let you walk away without trying. I thought about living the rest of my life wondering what might have been, and I decided that the possibility of you saying yes was worth the risk of you saying no." "I am so glad you took that risk," Eleanor said. "My life began the day you walked down that aisle. Everything before that was just preparation for the life we would build together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the stars emerged. Inside, they could hear Rose helping prepare dinner, and through the windows they could see several grandchildren playing. The sounds of family, of life and love and continuation surrounded them. "If you could go back," Jake asked suddenly, "knowing everything you know now, would you change anything about that day?" Eleanor thought about it seriously. "I might have worn different shoes. Those ones pinch terribly," she said with a laugh. Then she grew serious. "But no, I would not change a single thing. Every moment, every choice, every challenge led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Jake leaned over and kissed her gently. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said, "and the strongest, and the wisest, and the one I want to spend every remaining day of my life beside." "Then we are agreed," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling. Because I fully intend to spend every remaining day beside you, Jake Sullivan. You made me a promise 28 years ago in that church. You promised to work every day to make me happy, to never lie, never abandon me, and never give me reason to regret taking a chance on you. And have I kept that promise, what? Jake asked. Jake, every single day, Eleanor confirmed. You have exceeded it. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, a love that has sustained me through everything, and a partnership that has made me better than I could have been alone. You walked into that church and said his loss is my gain, but Jake, I was the one who gained. I gained everything. They remained on the porch long after dinner was ready, just sitting together in the peace of an evening well earned. Rose eventually came to fetch them, shaking her head fondly at her parents who were still, after all these years, so obviously in love. As they went inside to join their family for dinner, Eleanor paused to look back at the view from their porch one more time. The land stretched out before them, the ranch they had built through years of hard work and dedication, the legacy they were passing on to their children and grandchildren. And beside her stood the man who had made it all possible, who had seen her at her lowest moment and offered her his highest honor, his hand, his heart, and his future. The abandoned bride and the cowboy had become a legend in Silver Creek and beyond, a story of second chances and the courage to take a risk on love. But for Eleanor and Jake Sullivan, it was simply their life, their choice, and their enduring joy. They had built something real and lasting from that moment of crisis, proving that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the very best things in our lives. And as they sat down to dinner surrounded by the family they had created together, Eleanor caught Jake's eye across the table and smiled. He smiled back, that same steady, honest smile that had given her hope 28 years ago. No words were needed. After nearly 3 decades together, they spoke a language all their own, built on trust and love and the unshakable foundation of a partnership that had weathered every storm. Their love story, born in a moment of humiliation and transformed by courage and commitment, had become the bedrock on which a family and a legacy were built. And every day, in ways large and small, Eleanor and Jake Sullivan continued to choose each other, just as they had that extraordinary day in June of 1882 when a cowboy walked into a church and changed both their lives forever with 7 simple words. His loss is my gain. Will you have me?